Hello, Tar Heel Nation. Welcome back to another episode of UNC Hoops Talk podcast. I am your host, Dan DeWitt, and this is actually the 99th podcast of the UNC Hoops Talk podcast. And so glad that you've decided to listen, to watch, however you're taking this show in and joining in the conversation, and joining in my mission to unite Tar Heel Nation. Got a great show. Go through the last week's games, a couple of ugly wins without Joel Berry in the Davidson and Tennessee games, and introduce the first partnership of the podcast, and then jump right into the preview and what the meat and potatoes of this podcast is going to be. The preview of the UK game in Las Vegas this weekend. I guess we'll call him a special guest coming on for that part of it. But let's first jump into these past week's games. Both of them played without our point guard and our leader, Maui's MVP, in Joel Berry. Both of them pretty ugly wins for us. Davidson, we ended up winning 83-74. Started off really slow. I think we were even losing at halftime. And finally kind of got stuff clicking toward the end of the first half, at the beginning of the second half, and pulled out the win. Still no biscuits as we watch the biscuits drought. It's still been now over 2 years since the last biscuits for the Tar Heels and the local Tar Heels in the area. Justin Jackson leading us with 27 points, shot 9 for 19, 7 3-pointers. And we talked last week about the possibility of Kenny Williams maybe breaking the record of the 3-pointers made in a single game. But if I'd have to say Justin Jackson, just because of the sheer volume of shots he'll take and chances that he'll get, is probably more likely to get it. Came up one short of tying the record in this game with 7. But if anybody's going to break it or even tie it this year, I'm guessing it's going to be either Justin or Joel because of the volume of threes they'll take in any given game. But Justin Jackson ended up with 27 points. The only other person, I guess there's 2 other people in double figures, Isaiah Hicks being one of them with 13, and nobody will probably ever guess the other one. So I'll just tell you, it's Luke May had 10 points in the Davidson game. Kennedy Meeks with 9.7 rebounds. Justin Jackson also with 8 rebounds in this game. And like I said, kind of an ugly, grinded out win against a good offensive team in Davidson, always a solid club. Their backcourt came in with the leading scoring average in the country for backcourt between Jack Gibbs and Rusty Regal. Or no, not Regal. Who was it? Peyton Aldridge, their other point guard, or their other guard that is doing it. And we didn't let them down. They had 30 and 22, so we probably upped the average for them, letting them score 52. But we got the win. We moved on. We thought things were going to be okay. Just at that time, Joel Berry was doubtful or questionable for the Tennessee game. Ended up not playing, and it kind of showed not only in the Davidson game, the first game without him, but then also Tennessee, how important and how much he kind of makes this team go. And we started off the game just horrible. Tennessee was hitting everything, and we were hitting absolutely nothing. And the percentages show that for the first half. The only stat I'll give you for the first half was they shot 65% in the first half. We shot 36%, so about a 30 percentage difference. And yet we were only down 8. So, I mean, that's the positive part about it. But anytime you shoot 30 percentage points below a team, to be in the game is probably a little bit of luck to go along with it. But we come out the second half and came out strong, quick in the second half. We kept getting within 2. We tied it up a couple of times before about halfway through the second half, taking the lead and never really pulling away, as obviously we only won 73-71 as a final score. Again, only 3 guys in double figures, pretty balanced scoring in this one, even though we probably should have pounded it inside more than what we did. We're not successful feeding our posts and making them pay. I believe they only have like one guy or one starter at least that's 6'7" or above. And we just did not take advantage of it this game. Kenny Williams led us in scoring with 12. Nate Britt, even though everybody was killing him on Twitter, and he did have a poor shooting night. I'm not saying he didn't, but had 11 points. Tony Bradley, 10 points, 10 rebounds, and a double-double for the big-time freshman. And then we have Kennedy Meeks with 9, Isaiah Hicks with 6 before fouling out, and Justin Jackson on a horrible shooting night as well as 7 points. So again, not a pretty game at all. Our freshmen kind of saved us. Tony with the double-double. Brandon Robinson had some very valuable minutes and big-time plays in the first half. Seventh Woods, a couple of timely buckets in the second half. And, we barely pull out the win against a young Tennessee team, a Tennessee team that we talked about early in the season had lost to Chattanooga by 13 at home. And then we, of course, blew out Chattanooga by 40. I think they're a better team than what they were early in the season. But we were favored by 20 in this game. And I didn't really see that going that easily for us. I think with Joel Berry, we were favored by 20, and when it was announced Joel Berry was not going to play, it went down to like 19 and a half. I think he's more valuable than a half a point to us. So that was a little bit strange to me. But again, we get the win. We move on. And before I move on, I just want to say, Nate Britt, I talked about how he was getting killed on Twitter and people saying he shouldn't have been play, he shouldn't be on the team and all this stuff and he did take too many shots. Again, I'm not trying to excuse his shooting night. He was 4 for 14, 1 for 4 from 3. But everybody was that way. Justin Jackson was 3 for 15, 0 for 6 from 3. Kenny Williams was 5 for 10, 1 for 5 from 3 though. And as a team, we were only 2 for 17 from 3. So he wasn't the only one shooting bad. I agree he shouldn't have been taking as many shots as he was. I think some of it was, he felt like he was in Joel's spot and he had to kind of produce a little bit of that. But without Nate Britt, we don't win this game. He had 7 assists, 5 steals, and 4 of those big-time steals in the second half. A lot of them, at least 3 of them, leading to fast break points and easy layups for us. So no, he didn't shoot the ball well. I'm not going to condone all the shooting he did, but very important part as a backup point guard in this case, stepping into the starting role and helping us win. No matter how you see it. Again, I think it just shows how much Joel Berry is valuable to this team. We've seen in the past, Raymond Felton's year that we won the championship in, I guess it would be the 04-05 season. We lost to Santa Clara as one of our first games, and it wasn't really a good Santa Clara team that we lost to without Raymond Felton. And then we went on to win the national championship. Kendall Marshall's year, obviously we know what happened. Once he went out, we won one game in the tournament without him, and then ended up losing in Lead 8. But we know how important he was, and it's different for every point guard we've had. Raymond Felton, it was more of a, he put the pressure on the other team's point guard, and we kind of followed his lead. Kendall Marshall, just made everybody that much better by getting him open shots or easy shots. And Joel Berry, I think, is kind of a mix. I think he makes everybody on this team better, but he also has the intensity, the competitive nature that everybody plays up to his level, and he makes them better in that way, and we kind of follow his lead. But yeah, obviously in Roy's system, we know how important the point guard is, and I think it's even more important than a lot of us even think or realize until he's out or one of our point guards is out, and we're left without our best player in this case with Joel Berry. But also Tennessee did have a guy that was kind of snubbed by Carolina. I didn't know this before. They said afterwards Robert Hubbs III wanted to come to Carolina, wanted to come to the ACC, and didn't get an offer, ended up at Tennessee. And he just went off. He was like 7 for 7 in the first half with like 15 or 16 points. He ended up with 21 points, shooting 9 for 11 from the field, which always happens when we have a guy that wanted to play at Carolina and didn't get the scholarship. So, a couple of ugly wins for us for sure. I think, missed probably our best opportunities to get 100 at home and get those biscuits. But we'll keep watching that throughout this season and possibly in the next season if we don't get that. But we'll keep the biscuits drought segment alive as long as the Tar Heels keep it alive. But we're going to transition it for what was this past week into what is coming in the big game for us. Before I bring in the guest and before we get into that part, I want to announce the first partnership of the podcast, and that is with ACC Confidential website. They're going to put the podcast up there, and hopefully we'll reach more Tar Heel fans and again, unite Tar Heel Nation. But also would encourage you to support them. Go over to ACC Confidential. I believe the website is AtlanticCoastConfidential.com. The link will be in the description of this podcast, wherever you're watching or listening. And going to cover everything ACC, not just basketball, of course, not just North Carolina, but it'll be a good hub to go for a overview of the ACC and all sports as well. So go check them out. Let them know that I sent you there, and tell them that you were sent here from UNC Hoops Talk podcast. But anyway, without further ado, we are going to talk about the Kentucky Wildcats game with the Tar Heels on Saturday. This game is being played in Las Vegas as part of the CBS Sports Classic, which was just renewed for another 3 years after this year. But it will be played 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time tip on, of course, CBS, obviously being the CBS Sports Classic. And to talk about it, we're going behind enemy lines here. Somebody that's been on the podcast in the past, but I think it's been at least since last season, and also somebody that will be in person at the game here, and that is somebody being a part of Big Blue Nation. I know, sorry about that, but it is John Martin. John, welcome to the show, and it's good to have you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
That's all the Kentucky fans watching right there, applauding your joining the podcast here.
Yeah, if they actually knew, they would be boycotting.
They would be eating it up. We'd probably have twice the comments, but we can't handle all that traffic here. All right, so heading into Kentucky, John. First, before we even look at this game, everybody saw UCLA beat Kentucky at Rupp. Maybe even what happened in that game, but then what's happened for Kentucky since then? What's the rebound been like?
Well, they've rebounded fine. I mean, the game against UCLA played excellent. You could say that Kentucky wasn't as tenacious on defense as they should have been, but UCLA, if they don't have the best offense in the country, they have a top 3 offense. I mean, I've been very impressed with how they score, and they backed it up by shooting over 60% against Michigan here last weekend too. So that's a legit basketball team. What Kentucky needs to improve is just basic defensive fundamentals. They're not the best at pick and roll defense right now this early in the season, and they're not the best at transition to North Carolina. Justin Jackson is a type of player that will give them problems. Someone who can shoot from the 3, but also put the ball to the floor and go to the basket. And that side is where they need to improve defensively. Offensively, they scored 92 points against UCLA. But anyways, defense is the concentration. Defense and rebounding is where Camp Cal will be for the next couple of days before they head out to Las Vegas.
Okay, and we know, Kentucky, the one and done school, as well as that school down the road from us. But that means we don't know anybody that plays for Kentucky anymore. They're all brand new. So kind of give us the highlights, maybe, I mean, I at least, and I don't know about everybody listening, but the names coming in, but how have they produced compared to, the ratings as they come in, and who's big for them so far this year?
Right. I think the freshmen this class have done very well from the offensive end. They are, I think one of the best incoming offensive freshman groups that they've had since Cal's been a coach. De'Aaron Fox is the point guard. He's rangy. He's not a knockdown shooter, but he can get into the paint and score, and he, also transition is where he really excels. Malik Monk is someone that who is very streaky, but he is so gifted athletically, and he can get hot from the 3-point line and carry you for a good stretch of the game. And then also he's a very good transitional player as well. The other freshman that starts is Bam Adebayo at the 5 spot. Everybody says that he reminds them of Dwight Howard, and his game is very similar. He's more defensive, play on the block kind of guy. He doesn't have all the offensive skills yet. I think he'll improve as the season goes on, but he's he's done well. Those three guys have really lived up to their rating, in my opinion. The next two would be Wenyan Gabriel, who is Cal's trying to develop him into a defensive stopper. He has a nice little mid-range game, but he's thin. He's a guy that's going to have to benefit from more time in the weight room, but he's got a lot of potential. And I really think if Kentucky's going to make a deep run in March, I mean, he's a guy that has to make a big jump and improvement. And finally, someone that your group would know is Sasha Kalea-Jones from Chapel Hill. He was the lowest rated of the recruits coming in. And, he's not going to be a one and done player, but I will tell you that he's still growing and he's putting on a lot of muscle. And I really expect next year's when his time to shine. Right now, he's a fill-in player that, he may get maybe 5, 6, 8 minutes in the game against North Carolina.
Well, and you mentioned him being from Chapel Hill. Isn't Bam also from North Carolina?
Bam is also from North Carolina. I'm trying to remember what town. I think it's High Point, but yes, so Bam is from North Carolina as well.
So, I mean, does that play into the game at all? Do we have to worry about? I mean, obviously they could have came to Carolina. They're all not anybody that got snubbed from any place they wanted to go in the country. But will it? I mean, are they type of guys that will get up because it's the hometown team they're playing, even though it's in Las Vegas?
Bam's motor is always high, so I don't think he'll put in any additional effort as a reason because he's coming to the state of North Carolina. If there's anybody who would get up, it'd be Sasha. I mean, it's right in his backyard, and because Sasha is a role player, I think the extra effort would come out of him.
All right, so those are the newcomers. Obviously, there's not the entire team freshmen. There are a few, and in this case, this season, even some important parts of Kentucky's team returning. I know Isaiah Briscoe. Who else do we have to be aware of playing you guys?
Yeah, Isaiah Briscoe's, the best on-ball defender on the team, and he'll be key against North Carolina if they have any chance of beating him. He'll have to have a really good game. You have the upperclassmen. You have Derek Willis, who's a 6'9" guy that shoots from the three, and also he'll be relied on some rebounding. But he's a good player. Dominic Hawkins is a senior guard, which is a rarity for Kentucky these last several years. But he's a steady and influence. He's a really good on-ball defender, and he just doesn't make turnovers. He's not a dynamic offensive player, but he's just a steady role player. The one sophomore that will receive a lot of action will be Isaac Humphreys. He's a 7-footer, and I know there's going to be some fouls to be floating around in this game, so he'll have to be up for the challenge to play against Meeks and Hicks and Bradley and those guys.
All right, so that's enough Wildcat talk for a little bit. It's making me nauseous over here hearing too much about Kentucky at one time. So let's transition a little bit to, as you guys play the Tar Heels. Obviously, it hasn't been something that they've shied away from in the past. They had a home-and-home series going for a while, so they're familiar with each other. But watching us this season, and it's been documented how well we were playing early, and then now with Barry out, hasn't been as well. But what scares Kentucky Wildcats or any team in the country as an outsider looking at the Tar Heels? Is there a matchup specifically with you guys, or is just the way we've played early on the season? What's to watch from someone not a Tar Heel fan?
Well, I think Kentucky will try to disrupt North Carolina's offense. Is Barry playing? I'm assuming he's playing this Saturday, but I haven't heard any news.
I haven't heard anything official either. Because it's just a sprained ankle, and this is obviously a bigger game, I assume he's back as well. But
right. So, I mean, Kentucky switches everything, so you'll see a number of different guards guarding Barry. And so Fox and Briscoe especially will be the primary guys who will guard Barry. Monk to a lesser degree. So that would be strategy number one. I've already mentioned about Justin Jackson. That's the one position that's very troublesome for Kentucky, or has been so far. An example is TJ Leaf from UCLA. He's having a really good season, and he and Justin Jackson have some similarities in their game, and so that's where Kentucky's going to be challenging. Winion Gabriel, Blake Monk, and even Briscoe, he'll go out there and try to guard Justin Jackson. My biggest concern, though, is where North Carolina has a big advantage over most every team they play, and that's on inside play with Meeks and Hicks and those guys. Kentucky hasn't been as aggressive at boxing out, and especially on the weak side for offensive rebounds. That's an area of concern, and that I know is getting a lot of attention this week in practice.
And so, you mentioned Joel Berry playing, not playing. Obviously, that's big. I mean, anybody can see that. You don't have to be on a podcast to realize that, or even have watched the games. How big of a difference does it make? I mean, I'm guessing you're going to pick Kentucky to win whether he plays or not. But what's the spread there, or whatever that you would give it?
Yeah, my son was asking me this last night. I think Kentucky North Carolina is a toss-up with Berry in there. Okay, obviously
if he's completely healthy.
If he's completely healthy, if he's not playing at all, I mean, you've already talked about what struggles North Carolina had against Davidson and Tennessee. That'll be problematic for North Carolina against Kentucky, because Kentucky has 4 guards that they can count on to do well, and so Berry missing the game would be problematic for UNC. But I think I'm interested to see what the Las Vegas line is going to be. It's a neutral court. I really think these two teams are ranked right beside each other. I think it's a pick 'em game with Berry's in there playing healthy.
Yeah, and I haven't seen every Kentucky game or even seen all the scores, but I doubt you guys struggle with consistency as much as us. But obviously Berry being back, and then you talked about us possibly having an advantage inside with our big guys. But as I did mention in Tennessee and David's game, and we've had it even previous seasons with these same players, is the consistency of Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks. So it's a big stage. Hopefully they show up, and we have to count on them showing up. But that becomes a big line in the deciding factor of the game as well. And you mentioned your guys' guards. You guys are big guards, if I'm not mistaken, as well, right? Joel Berry I think is like 6'1", but at least he's stocky and kind of hold his own. From there we go. Stillman White and Nate Britt and Seventh Woods, all very small in stature. Even Brandon Robinson at the 2-3 spot needs to put on a lot of weight before he can really defend somebody like that. From that, Kenny Williams I think would probably stand up. Probably not the same kind of athlete as some of your guards, but at least would match up. Am I correct in that? You guys they're all pretty. I know they're physical, but they're all pretty even tall and big, right?
Well, Fox and Monk go about 6'3". Now, the thing with Fox, though, if you watch him, he may be slightly taller than that now, because I think he's grown since he's joined Kentucky. But the thing you'll notice about Fox is how his wingspan is. And Monk is pretty rangy as well. The only short guard they have really is Dominic Hawkins, and he comes off the bench. Briscoe's about 6'1", but he's a very barrel-chested, physical guy that can get in and rebound and go to the hole, and he gets up close guarding him. So I actually think, you go back to when Kentucky had the Harrison twins, they were 6'5", but they were not as rangy and as tenacious guarding the ball as the group that Kentucky has now.
And so, you mentioned Monk, who comes in as your guys' best shooter, again, if I'm not mistaken. But that is kind of a struggle for Kentucky, is it not, shooting from the outside?
They're being streaky. Your best shooters are Monk, and Monk is someone that the team trusts implicitly to take a three-pointer. Derek Willis is also a guy that they'll trust to take the three-pointer. And the next guy they have is actually the best shooter on the team. He's a defensive liability, but when he comes in, he'll be expected to shoot the three, and that's Michael Mulder. He's a senior JUCO transfer that I hadn't mentioned earlier. But those are your 3 primary three-point shooters, and we've had nights where we made over 10 three-pointers in a game. We've also had nights where we made 2 and 3. So you just don't know from game to game what's that going to be like.
Well, join the club, because if there's inconsistency, we know it as a Tar Heel nation. But to me, that's kind of where it comes down to, because obviously North Carolina has not been splendid or superb at defending the three-point ball. And then, like you said, with our advantage on the inside, it has to be if those guys are playing well. So to me, that's kind of the X factors. If you guys are shooting the ball well, that's going to be a big problem for us. If we're playing well inside and drawing fouls and getting offensive rebounds, that's a problem for you guys. Is there another X factor besides those two that you can think of or that you see out there?
It may come down to free throw shooting. Kentucky scores. We've been talking about the 3-point shooting, but actually Kentucky scores over 40% of their action is inside. Okay, going to the rack or rebounding missed shots and putting them back up. So they still rely on the inside game, and part of that obviously extends to free throw shooting. This Kentucky team's a decent free throw shooting team, but there's games where they shoot 62, 63%, and in a game like this against North Carolina, that won't be good enough. I'm not sure how North Carolina shoots it from the foul line, but they're probably similar. It just depends on who's shooting it, right?
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
If you want inconsistency as well, you can look at our free throws. So, yeah, against Tennessee, we shot 54%, and we shot 24, 25 of them. Against Davidson, we shot almost 80%. So, yeah, it's going to fluctuate quite a bit on who's, and again, you mentioned the inside play. If we're going inside and it's our big guy shooting, isn't necessarily good. Tony Bradley's like a 50% at best. I think they said even 40%. Kenny Meeks has had his struggles from the free throw line. So it's definitely who's shooting. And with fouls as well, you guys have more big guys than us. I mean, we go, the 3 deep with the guys you mentioned, Meeks and Hicks and Bradley. And then after that, we go to Luke May, who's just not on the same level, height-wise, athletic-wise, any of that stuff with the guys he'd be matching up with. So that, easily could come into play as well, yes.
Yeah, I expect when North Carolina sees Kentucky play, the fans anyway, if they haven't seen them play, I think they'll say this reminds us of our own team. There's a lot of similarities. The biggest difference is you're more physical down low, but the play is very similar. Cal and Roy are not going to change their game plans just because they're playing each other. I mean, they are what they are for the most part. And I know Calipari this week is just focusing on fundamentals. So he's not going to try to grind in any special plays or anything to try to fake UNC out. I don't think UNC is going to come out and play a 1-3-1 defense or anything like that. I mean, this is going to be man-to-man transition basketball. Great for spectators, and so we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best we can hope for is that Joel Berry is healthy. He comes back, and yeah, it's a good game, and it comes down to the wire. Barring any blowout from either side, if we blow out you guys blow us out or anything, a loss in this game really makes not a huge difference to either team, does it?
I don't think so, other than maybe a slot in seeding, right? I mean, when we get down to the end of the season, the NCAA committee is trying to seed these. I expect North Carolina and Kentucky will be right there in, the top 8 for most of the season, and sometimes in the top 4. And it just might be a seeding slot. That's all it might get down to because of the head-to-head.
Right. The big non-conference win is what's on line, right? Because you guys lost at home to UCLA.
Right. And previously it was thought that Michigan State was a good win. That's not turning out to be the case. Arizona, the win over Arizona State was not great either. And so anyway, this is a big one. They got North Carolina, they got Louisville these next 2 games, and they need at least split one of them. Hopefully they'll win both.
Right, and we obviously lost to Indiana, so this is kind of our next, it is our biggest non-conference win if we can get it. So, you'd rather go in with a big non-conference win than without it. So
yeah, and the problem for Kentucky, unlike North Carolina, you're going to get to play Duke twice, and you've got other opportunities to improve your resume. After the North Carolina and Louisville stretch, they got to play Kansas in January. So that's definitely a resume builder, but the SEC's weak.
Right.
They've been weak for years now, and they're especially weak this season. So there's not much Kentucky can do after the Kansas game to bolster their resume. The games just aren't there.
All right, yeah. So the game, as I said earlier, is obviously on Saturday on CBS Network, 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time in Las Vegas. John will be looking for you in the crowd and expecting a big blue headdress or something, so you stick out, and we can find you dancing in the crowd or something like that. But hopefully, after North Carolina win.
It'll be interesting. I bought tickets from the UCLA section, and I've been hearing on Kentucky Sports Radio that the Kentucky fans that live in Kentucky haven't been receiving their tickets from the UCLA box office that ordered there. They've conveniently lost them in the mail, so to speak. So it's going to be interesting. I might be all by myself in that section. So anyway, but I'm looking forward to the game.
All right, as are we. And John, I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast. Coming up next for the Tar Heels after the Kentucky game is University of Northern Iowa. We remember what happened last year in that one, but it is in Chapel Hill this year. I plan to podcast before that one, so we'll get into that a little bit more in the next podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, wherever you watch. Share it with your Tar Heel friends and family. Get the word out there. Again, Unite Tar Heel Nation is the mission of this podcast. John, even though you are a Kentucky fan, you're welcome here, and I thank you for coming on to the podcast again and appreciate the insight you give us on Kentucky.
Well, I appreciate it too, Dan, and if you need help throwing some shade on Duke, just invite me on your podcast later this year.
Well, it sounds like a plan. All right, for everybody listening, just remember, go Heels.